Again, I wanted to remind you, my target, I predicted a rally to new all-time highs. My target was 5750 to 6,000 based on the trend lines here in the monthly time frame. Total complacency right now. And again, we're coming up into this area. Right now, we're in the high 5,800 area. We could go as high as 6,000 and slam up into that trend line. The trend line's just in the high 5,900 area, just below 6,000. Don't know that we make it all the way up there, but we're in this range. And again, trend line, one excludes the shadow, one includes it there from the 2,000 top. We're at levels of total complacency as we're up at that trend line. Complacency is a feeling of security while unaware of or unconcerned with unpleasant realities or harmful possibilities. 2, a feeling of security often while unaware of some potential danger or trouble. Those are the definitions of what we have right now with complacent traders, investors. They are oblivious to the risks that are about to happen. And we're being told so much, oh, a soft landing's going to happen with the Fed. Not going to be a recession. There is no risk. And again, we can see the trend line on the S&P 500. We're right in the area where, again, a top is likely to develop between 5750, which was my low end of the target, to 6,000, my high end of the target. It's unlikely we're going to be able to push above that trend line and be able to remain above it. The Dow tried to overthrow it slightly, and it reversed hard, dropping sharply this week off of that trend line. Dow very well may have peaked and may get a lower high. If we rally back up on the Dow, we could see the S&P and NASDAQ try to move higher. Still think NASDAQ is going to hold below the July peak, but we could see them attempt to recover and the Dow still get a lower high. But they're unaware of and unconcerned. Complacency is having security where you're unaware of and unconcerned with unpleasant realities or harmful possibilities. And I think that's an accurate description of where we're at right now. People don't want to think about harmful possibilities or, what could be an unpleasant reality for them. People get into a stage of denial. And again, having a sense of security while unaware of potential trouble, danger or trouble. That's where we're at as we approach the trend line here in the monthly time frame. I think that, again, we're in an area, there's total complacency, completely oblivious to, again, the harmful possibilities, what could be unpleasant realities. When they start happening, people will have unpleasant realities and, again, be in denial. Second definition, again, and have a feeling of security, aware of, again, potential danger or trouble, which is what we're at right here. Do you think that both bulls and bears are now complacent? Usually what happens at the top, bulls are already complacent, and then the bears get complacent, and they go, oh, it's not going to happen after all, and then boom, out of nowhere, it all of a sudden hits. Now, again, we don't know what the catalyst is going to be. It could be earnings. It could be, again, the Fed coming up. Again, a post-election sell-off. Again, in the Middle East, we just don't know. We had a geopolitical issue here. Israel went ahead and responded to the Iranian missile attack from October 1st. Being reported they hit 20 targets, and then they announced it before they did it to Iran, and then they announced it was over a few hours later. Bitcoin really didn't have any kind of volatility surrounding this. So again, maybe this is a nothing burger for the market. I told you, geopolitical issues, you just never know. Do things escalate from here? We're getting reports from some news outlets that Iran is not going to respond. They're downplaying the attack. Last night they were denying that it was even happening on social media with their state-run media over there. They were denying at first that it was even that it even happened. News outlets are saying that they've now admitted it happened, but saying that it's just limited damage. Maybe they're saying that like the last time, that it didn't even happen, so they don't have to respond. Because again, we know two things. We know that Iran struggles to penetrate Israel's defense systems, and their attack was pretty much ineffective. A couple of missiles got through. But we know that Israel just easily penetrated Iran's defense systems, and they were helpless. And they apparently struck what's being reported as 20 different military targets. That's the information that we have so far. They're saying, it could evolve in a war. Does Iran respond immediately? Do they respond in a few days or a couple weeks? We just simply don't know. So again, just something to pay attention to, something to be on the radar. These geopolitical issues, you just never know. But this may or may not have tuning the market. The market, again, could have a relief rally that it's over. See the topping tails play out. It may be another issue or a combination of things that give us volatility. But again, I've been watching this issue to see if it rattles the market or not. I told you it may or may not. We just simply don't know. Now, in my last video, I talked about the rising wedge on the S&P 500. We have two trend lines, one excluding the shadow here at the September low, the other including it. And again, we're also watching the 20-period moving average. We're trying to bounce off of it at the moment, but we did get a topping tail, a possible topping tail there on Friday. Now, in this video, I'll be talking about if we don't break down, we could still, again, form that divergence on the awesome oscillator that I've been talking about. Again, I'm looking for a topping process, but let me just show you these rising wedges. Here I have both of them on this chart. And again, if we see this other trend line break down, then we want to be watching the 50-period moving average and this horizontal, well, I didn't draw that very straight, this horizontal level of support right in here at the 56.75 area or so. Now, Friday, the S&P went back up, filled that gap at 51.50 or 58.51, I should say, when it gapped lower. I believe it was last Wednesday. And we gapped higher Thursday here. We got the inverse head and shoulders, and then we gapped higher on Friday, but then the rally fizzled out, and that created a topping tail. Now, again, candlesticks have to be confirmed in the daily time frame in order to play out. We've seen candlesticks form before and not get confirmed or get a follow-through. Are we just going back to fill the gap and we could still go up and form that divergence, or do we move now to start taking out this low, to start taking out the 20 period, to start taking out that other trend line, including the shadow? Here you can see the trend line excluding the shadow, and again, I've talked about this being a back test. If we don't form a divergence, again, then we have a back test on our hands. We'll need to take out the 20, start moving down lower towards the 50 or the 100 period here, and start seeing the divergence here play out. If we buy more time, again, you can see another reference point of a divergence develop on some indicators, like with momentum, and you can see, and with the RSI, other indicators just form a divergence. I talked about this in the last video. Here's the trend line, including the shadow. So we're going to look at the awesome oscillator. Now, if this can hold, if we can get a bounce right here, then maybe you've got, rather than a topping tail, an inverted hammer. Two really important trend lines to be watching as we go into next week. A lot of earnings. Again, it still may not be done, and again, the overall topping process still may be under construction. So do keep that in mind. Again, I told you, just let me make it clear. Again, I've been calling for new all-time highs. Over here in August, even though I was predicting the sell-off here, over here in August when I said, hey, we were going to sell off, told you it's still not done. Over here, I told you, hey, we're going to bottom the following week with the inflation data. We did. And I told you we were going to rally up, new all-time high, so NASDAQ can fill the gap. NASDAQ hadn't filled the gap over here. It finally did 2 weeks ago. Now that it's done that, now I'm looking for the topping process up here. If it's done, I need to see evidence of that. I don't have enough evidence of that yet. S&P 500 daily chart, and we've seen the momentum shift, okay? But the trend signals are still hanging in there. Momentum has shifted, but the trend is still bullish at the moment. I've talked about the awesome oscillator. Again, over here, as we got our recent peak, I talked about red bars showing up. And again, that completed this divergence here, Class B divergence, where we almost have two equal peaks. And again, that's given us this volatility. Does this evolve into something where we get a bigger sell-off, or do we start seeing green bars? Maybe we get another red bar or two and turn back up, or maybe we start seeing green bars immediately. Does this turn back up and form a divergence, or do we start seeing the awesome oscillator move into negative territory and start breaking down and moving towards the 50 period? This is what I'm watching. And if we start breaking down and breaking this trend line, including the shadow right there, we start breaking down, then again, broken both trend lines, and again, we could do more technical damage. Also, do we stay below the 10? We tried to get back above it. We tried to flip the cloud at the intraday high of the session, the intraday highs there on Friday, but we were not able to do it. So the $64,000 question now is, are we going to try to bounce off that trend line and start trying to form a divergence? And that's still in the cards. It's still a possibility. Again, if we push and close above the upper boundary of the topping tail from Friday, it will negate the pattern, just as we did back with the Fed back over here. Again, it negated the pattern. We gapped above and closed above that level, and it canceled it out. So do we see something like that and get a divergence? We tried to flip the cloud. We tried to flip the intraday charts back to bullish there on with the momentum and with the trending signals, and it failed because we got the topping tail. So we'll see what happens here. Again, I've been predicting new all-time highs for the S&P, and after this sell-off, we got these rallies. I told you it's not done yet. And then we got the triangle. We got this triangle sideways. And then I told you it's not done yet. Do we get something like that? Do we get something like the triangle and see the signals try to turn back to bullish and get this divergence right here? I think that is very, very possible. But like I said, I'm looking for clues. I don't know the future. You don't know the future. We're looking at mathematically based indicators to try to figure out what's going on here, telling you the different possibilities. Now, we get weakness, then again, we'll see signals turn and we'll have more evidence. But again, I need more evidence because right now we're just getting a pullback so far and kind of going in this sideways trading range. So we'll be watching. If we get back above the 10 period or if we remain below it and take out the 20 period moving average. So this is what I'm watching for. I'm looking for a topping process. Again, I'll be looking for red bars here. And again, times they show up and you start turning immediately. Other times the red bars show up and you buy a little bit more time. So we'll see what happens. Do red bars show up next week? We broke the winning streak on the S&P and the NASDAQ, the S&P and the Dow. We broke the 6-week winning streak, but NASDAQ has a 7-week winning streak. It did not. It squeaked out again there in the weekly time frame. So again, we're watching this triple divergence right here. And again, this is likely going to produce a reversal in the topping in the daily time frame. Now we got a topping tail in the form of a gravestone doji. Actually, we closed right there at the upper boundary of the cloud, so it did not flip, but intraday it did. And again, we gave back the rally. So the question now is, again, do we have something like over here, like with the Fed, where you get a topping tail, but again, it's a fake candle and you end up still going higher? Again, I was predicting a Fed pivot rally, which we got. We got the Fed pivot rally after the Fed meeting, which I told you was going to happen with that bar right there, that we were going to get a Fed pivot rally. And if you hear crash rather than Fed pivot rally, you're not listening to a word I'm saying. Some people only hear what they want to hear. They have a presuppositional bias, and so they only hear the bearish things of, hey, the market's going to top and we're going to form a bear market crash. They don't hear the part about new all-time highs and the NASDAQ rallying up to 20,400 after I predicted this crash. I've been warning you, this cap is going to get filled over here for months now. I've been warning you about this. People, again, they have a presuppositional bias, so they don't hear the part about the rally. They only hear the part about the crash. Talked about both. Again, are we getting a topping tail here? Are we going to start resuming the decline, or is it a fake out move? Rather than being a topping candle, is it a candlestick forming a bottom in the consolidation? We got one over here. Rather than a topping tail, it was an inverted hammer that gave us that advance. So again, we'll see what happens here. But again, could we get, let me just make this a little bigger so you can see it. Could we get green bars going into next week with earnings and see a divergence develop here? Or again, the upper boundary of the rising wedge that I've talked about with the NASDAQ, could we, and we were just shy of it, could we, again, flirt with that level and, again, still make a lower high? Or, again, if I'm wrong about the peak over here, just go slightly higher. So I'm going to be watching. Do we get a divergence here? The awesome oscillator did go higher here. It's not two equal peaks. This one clearly is higher and still might form a divergence here on the awesome oscillator in the daily time frame for the NASDAQ. So I'll be watching. Now, we did get the topping tail, likely, again, for the rising yield. Your yield, it started to go down and then it ended up turning back up, and that again has been rattling the market all week long. Also, again, probably speculation about Israel responding to Iran's October 1st missile attack. Again, do we start selling off? Do we rebound? We'll see what happens. I'll be watching to see, do divergences still set up here? Very well could. Or, again, if we start selling off, this will eventually just stay red and go negative. So we'll see what happens. But we've got a gravestone doji. Again, the candlestick is meaningless unless it's confirmed. You have to take out the 10 and 20 period. You have to start seeing, this play out. Do we get a green cloud next week, and this doesn't play out, or do we start seeing a drop back below the 10 and 20? Watching, do we see the awesome oscillators get any kind of green as we go into earnings next week or not? And do we hold above the 10 and 20, or do we start taking these levels out? But the two trend lines on the S&P, here including the shadow, and here excluding the shadow, again, are we in backtest mode and we start to sell off here? Similar situation on NASDAQ. Just quickly, if we see NASDAQ continue to rally, again, we have that trend line directly overhead. Again, nice looking channel from the pandemic low. We had that longer term channel in the monthly time frame. But let's look at the rising wedge quickly. And here it is. Here I have both of them. Again, do we start seeing a divergence develop in this most recent price action here where we turn back up? We've already moved slightly higher. So again, could further develop that here and come up into this trend line. We did break this one, but we tried to get back above the blue trend line there, and we ended up closing back below it. So again, is it just a back test of this smaller rising wedge, like I talked about the breakdown of the rising wedge on the S&P 500? Again, the trend line is further down here if we take that from the August low, a larger rising wedge. And let me just show you that. So again, don't rule out that we don't come up here and still better define this. And again, 2 weeks ago, we reached that gap fill area at 20,400. Okay, I talked about this for a very long time. We finally reached it. Okay, now I'm looking for the topping process. And again, I talked about getting a close above the upper Bollinger Band. We still may see that happen. We didn't do it here. We turned off of it. Here we turned off of it. We still may see that happen unless we start seeing more evidence of a breakdown, and this ends up being a topping tail where we start seeing a sell-off with the earnings, or if tensions in the Middle East escalate further, do we start selling off and get a post-election sell-off since we've already had a rally ahead of it? Do we, with the Fed, which is coming there early November, the next Fed meeting? I'm watching the MACD here. Again, do we get a divergence? We had a Class B divergence right here, two equal peaks on the indicator. Price went higher. That's given us a sell-off. But again, we're not taking out key support levels to continue the selling. Do we do that here with the gravestone doji? Again, the candlestick will be meaningless unless it's confirmed. So I'll be watching what happens here. Do we come up and hit this trend line, or we have the rising wedge trend line there close to that, very similar, going a little bit further back. So we'll be watching this very closely. But again, I'm looking for a top right here. Now, NASDAQ Composite did move above the July peak. NASDAQ 100 has not. So again, I could be wrong about that. And if I am, we go up and hit that trend line in the weekly time frame just a little bit higher, then I'll be watching that level. Why I thought a top was there. Now, let's look at the rising wedge. The rising wedge from the August low. And keep in mind, the Dow sold off, what was it, 2.68% or something like that? It was down over 1,100 points for the week. If it attempts to rebound, we could still see NASDAQ, try to make a new high or dance around this area if this candlestick is not confirmed. So keep that in mind. I talk about over here how we got this inverted hammer 10 period. That could have easily been a topping tail had we dropped below the 10 period moving average. It wasn't. We went back up to test the high. Do we see something like that here? Again, I've got the trend line right here, including the shadow here. I've got the peak here and here connected, excluding the shadow just a little bit lower. Some levels I'm watching here. The high over here at the peak just under 20,700. I think it's 20,690 or 70 or something like that. It's just right under that level. But again, going to be looking at this rising wedge. The rising wedge patterns are very reliable patterns, but like I keep saying, it may not be done yet. Are we forming a divergence, another reference point of a divergence here, and it's not yet done? Now, if the topping tail, we did move above this peak. If the topping tail plays out immediately, we got to see, again, confirmation of that come Monday, and then we need to get a follow-through shortly thereafter. Again, if we start to sell off, we have volatility. Do we come back, as I've said, back to the trend line here, but then try to bounce? We'll be watching to see how this unfolds. But again, if the topping tail is going to play out, we have to see confirmation of follow through. Then we got to start seeing signals begin to turn. Right now, see momentum shift, but the trend signals are still bullish at this point. Not only is momentum bearish with the bearish reversal of conditions on the chart I showed you earlier, we still have the momentum line bearish here in the daily time frame. I told you we had warning signals that we were going to see some kind of sell-off or volatility. That's happened. We rallied back up. NASDAQ moved slightly higher than the previous peak there 2 weeks ago. S&P got a lower high. So there is a divergence between the two. Whether that plays out or not, who knows? Maybe it's not done yet. But we are seeing momentum begin to turn negative here. I don't think that happened with NASDAQ yet. I think it's right there at the center line. But here, again, momentum, if it stays negative and we start taking out the 10 and 20 period moving average, then the S&P will have some serious problems. If we can see an attempted rebound and get that back in positive territory, then again, you might still form a divergence in this most recent price action. We did have, again, a Class B divergence here that has given us this volatility, but are we just kind of going sideways like we did over here with my triangle that I talked about? Here, we don't have a blue arrow yet. We did get one on NASDAQ. So again, do we see an attempted recovery still? Maybe form the bullish divergences on the awesome oscillator that I've talked about. Maybe get another reference point of a divergence here with momentum, and maybe like on the RSI and the MACD. We'll see what happens. But momentum line, red arrow there. These signals, they did play out. It might be short term. See what happens. We don't have major sell signals yet. We did have them over here. Now you got one right here, but it only gave us a pullback. We'll see if more signals develop, if a divergence develops, another reference point of a divergence, or if we start breaking down. We're starting to get a gray shaded area telling us that a squeeze move up or down is setting up. Now again, sometimes these can play out quickly. Other times they take a longer time. So again, this still may be under construction here, but just something we're paying attention to. When it ends, then the squeeze happens. Here it was very brief, short. Here it was bigger. And here, again, it told us we were likely going to go to new highs. I talked about that with the triangle, that we were setting that up at the time. So again, with earnings, we see the momentum line turn back. We start getting a bullish reversal of conditions next week on the daily chart. Then again, we could still see a larger divergence develop here. We'll see what happens if we start breaking down and seeing the cloud breakdown, start seeing this line representing the swing move breakdown, this line representing the short-term trend. We start seeing trend signals begin to break down, then all bets are off. You got the ribbon here. Does that start turning red and flipping over like we did over here, the ribbon? So again, just some things to be paying attention to. Momentum is bearish. The trend is still bullish. We'll be watching to see, does the trend turn bearish or do we form a larger divergence? That's why I'm paying attention to the awesome oscillator. That's why I'm paying attention to the trend lines on the rising wedge in the daily time frame. About how we're bouncing off the cloud right here. This is looking at, again, the shorter term trend. We bounced off at this level, exactly what we did over here. We got a lower high and then we broke down. Here, again, do we get a higher high and then begin to break down and get another reference point of a divergence, or do we break down with a lower high? We'll be watching. This is S&P intraday, does a larger divergence develop. We had a little one here develop right there. Do we end up getting a larger one? Breaking this level, breaking below the low that we had earlier in the week, then again, that would be a sign of weakness. Again, I talked about the trend lines. I talked about here I have the one that, again, we're back testing it. Again, we tried rally, but it kind of fizzled out. Here, again, the momentum line tried to turn bullish intraday there on Friday, but it failed. It turned right back to bearish. We ended up getting that sell-off after with the rally. Again, momentum is bearish here. Trend is bearish. Again, this is just looking at the short-term swing moves, but the signals have been very accurate. And again, we actually tried to see the balance of power turn positive with that rally, but it ended up failing. We ended up going right back into negative territory here intraday. So we tried to flip some signals, but it failed. Now have a topping tail that's going to play out. Or again, do we buy a little bit more time and the topping tail in the daily time frame fails, like the topping tail failed the day of the Fed meeting? We'll be watching to see what happens. But right here, the momentum's still bearish, and we're back testing. If it can flip back to bullish, then the other trend line, including the shadow, comes into play. But again, amazing signals here. Now, momentum and the short-term swing move currently are bearish. So there's still risk of downside unless we can flip the signals back to bullish quickly. Same thing here. This past week, we've seen the signals begin to turn bearish intraday. Will they remain that way? Is it going to be short-lived like over here, or do we get something uglier like over here? And right here on the S&P 500, we had the RSI break down earlier in the week. With the rally, it tried to flip back to bullish. The momentum line, the cloud, they tried to flip back to bullish. It failed. It failed here. And again, we ended up selling off. We ended up getting a little topping tail intraday, and the signals remain bearish. The momentum line, the cloud, they remain bearish. Again, is it going to be short-lived like over here with the triangle, or is it going to be, again, a bigger sell-off? We'll be watching. But right now, we've had the diversions. Still could get another one. We dropped below the 50 level here on the RSI, got back above it. We're still right at it right there. Do we turn back up and end up seeing a larger divergence develop here and go up for one final push, or do we start the breakdown? Again, we do have a divergence, but it's a divergence with the S&P being lower and NASDAQ being higher. Sometimes they diverge, but the divergences may not be done forming, and we still may see them both get larger divergences here. So again, we're looking for clues. But like I said, again, I need more evidence if the top is in. But you can clearly see the signals I'm looking at. Question is, will we see the signals here turn back to bullish if we form a bearish divergence there on the awesome oscillator in the daily chart? Let me show you NASDAQ. Before I do, right here, again, signals tried to turn back to bullish intraday, and again, they didn't close that way. The intraday rally fizzled. And again, we gapped higher, went back to fill the gap on the S&P 500. So there you have it. So signals, again, I've talked about, do we end up seeing diversions develop on some of my oscillators? But the intraday charts are still bearish with momentum, still bearish with the short-term swing moves. So we'll be watching to see, do these turn back to bullish? They remain bearish, and we start flipping the trend signals in the daily time frame. Bearish. Now, I showed you the S&P in the daily here with the momentum line and the red arrow. We got a blue arrow on the NASDAQ. And let me just show you that. Again, we had these warnings of a short-term top right here. This is just looking at momentum, and the X's are saying, hey, short-term top is in, and that's now played out. We've seen this sell-off with the S&P. We attempted to rebound on Friday, but again, no blue arrow. The momentum line is still red. Let me show you the NASDAQ daily chart. Again, we did get that topping tail. Momentum line still bearish. Had the red arrow turn back to blue, though. here on a Friday. Here we're still in positive territory, but we're right at that center line. Do we go negative and start seeing a big sell-off and start seeing trend signals turn bearish, or do we firm back up and again finish forming the divergence, another reference point of a divergence in that rising wedge pattern? So again, right here, momentum line is still bearish, but we're getting an arrow. We tried to flip a bullish reversal of conditions on the daily chart, couldn't do it. We do have momentum trying to flip back to bullish here on the NASDAQ, so we'll be watching to see momentum and the trend. Are we just going sideways before a breakdown, or do we buy a little bit more time? S&P signals intraday still bearish. Here on NASDAQ, it flipped back to bullish. We'll be watching to see how this unfolds. S&P signals turn back to bullish. NASDAQ intraday signals revert right back to bearish. They remain bullish. We got to see the daily momentum flip back to bullish on NASDAQ and S&P 500 daily charts.